So, good afternoon. We are starting now the Highrise Symposium, Highrise Living in the Inclusive City. Today is the panel 3, Producing the Vertical City, Capital and State. And we will have the presentations of Manuel Appert from University of Lyon, He's going to present the theme Thoughts in residential high-rises in London, current developments. Then we will have Julio Arroyo from Faculdade de Arquitectura, Desenho e Urbanismo, da Universidade Nacional del Litoral de Santa Fe, Argentina. He's going to present about verticalization in Santa Fe, Argentina, transformations in the unequal city. Then we will have Huana Carvalho and César Simone. They are going to present the work entitled Financialization and Verticalization in the Metropolitan Production of São Paulo. Juana Carvalho is a PhD student in the University of Lyon 2. And César Simone, he's from the Department of Geography at USP. And Beatriz Rufino, she's going to present the work Expansion and Crisis in Real Estate Restructuring, What's New in the Diffusion and Concentration of Investments, and she's from Faculty of Architecture and Urbanism at the University of São Paulo. So I would like to welcome everybody, and thanks to our speakers and our audience in YouTube. Then we'll have the presentations, then I'm going to make some comments and questions, and then we have also questions from the public that you can put in the chat and we will receive, and then we'll have time to discuss the questions, all the questions in the end of our symposium after all the presentations. Thank you. So I'd like to ask Manuel Appert.
Can you hear me and can you see my screen? Okay. Just to see the chat. So if you can hear me, your screen is not shared. Okay. Okay. So this time, can you see my? I have I cannot see the chat and my screen as well. It's chiant. It's not working with the usual tools. It's so annoying. Lire, fichier, lire. Ah, lire là. So, okay, I don't know. Please, Christian, tell me with your with message if you can see my screen, because I cannot see anything. I see that okay, that's fine. It's so annoying. So I'm starting back again. I don't know if you remember, if you were there on Tuesday, for the 6th of April. I already talked about the verticalization of London. So I mainly dealt with some trends and tendency, and try to explain the location pattern of the new high-rises that were built from the beginning of the year 2000, because I was mentioning that London was experiencing a new high-rise boom from the year 2000 until now. And I was showing you the spatialities of this high-rise boom, the location pattern, and some sort of correlations between these high-rise constructions and some parameters, a bit like what Manuel was also showing for São Paulo. So the correlation between parameters, urban parameters such as house prices, real estate markets, but also socio-demographic contexts. So I was explaining that, and I was giving you some insights and information. I can go rapidly through the pictures of the verticalization process, mentioning that was that we are seeing a new reconcentration of high rises in some specific spots of transformation. And I was finishing with this typology of high-rise building, a typology built on the question, on the context they are sitting in, they are built in. And I was talking about the different categories. I was proposing the beacon of regeneration, and we were in the context of creating value in a specific real estate market with very low rental or low transaction values. So in an area to be redeveloped in the future, but quite risky for developers. And you see here the Strata Tower as a tower of a beacon of regeneration with some public housing, low-rise and also high-rise public housing from the end of the 60s, and the new Strata Tower built in the year 2000. And then I was talking also about the luxury Belvedere, which showing you the One Blackfriars building on the river, right on the riverbanks of the Thames. Talking about the crash pad also from high rises built around business district, so that with small size apartment for business people working in these business areas, and also some niche developments for students or for all people in the city. And I was showing you some student housing and all people housing in the suburb, in the city of London. So I wanted to finish this presentation before talking about my next presentation, that is on the topics of today, which is much more on the verticalization of the suburbs, or trying to explore the suburbs with the same theoretical tools. So from now I will deal with the theoretical tools I've used and I have proposed from the empirical analysis I've done in the last 10 years. So I've tried to assemble the puzzle of urban theories and trends and mixes them together to try and to give a theoretical framework to understand verticalization in the context of a global city in Europe, London. I don't think this is a theoretical framework that might work for everywhere else, but I think some bits and pieces can work around. I've tried to propose a theorization using the three different stages of verticalization. The first stage, I would say, that is the return of the high rise, the moment that high rise were again accepted and planning permission also accepted, socially and culturally accepted, but also considered as less risky by developers and by municipalities, because European cities are now, and Carlos showed also the context of Sevilla earlier on, and how this European context make high rises some kind of alien to this kind of environment. So the first stage would be the restarting of verticalization, but at the turn of the 1990s and 2000. And then the moment where you have the acceleration or the enabling of the residential verticalization, that would be the 2005-2020 to now. And now the time that we consider that verticalization as a way of producing the city is normal. It has been normalized in one of the solutions that is possible to apply to provide housing, but also other types of amenities. So I try to bring together try to frame the restarting of high rises in London. I try to mix the geopolitics of power in state versus municipality, but also micro-histories, the question of how people relate to each other and in which circles they gravitate and what kind of taste they have, etc., etc. So for the municipality of London was introduced again by the Labour Party in the 1990s, and it was set up again in the year 2000 with the election of an assembly and also a new mayor, and it was Ken Livingstone, which was elected as a new mayor of London in 2000. This mayor, very left-wing, Ken the Red, sorry, very left-wing, was also gravitating with a lot of architects and urbanists at that time, as namely people like Richard Rogers and Norman Foster, that especially Richard Rogers, who has developed a much more in-depth urban analysis or urban, but also people from Peter Murray, for instance, for the design centers and from institutions, architectural foundations and institutions in London. And these people at the same agenda is that re-putting density in the center of planning, of urban planning in the UK, because the UK cities went with very low densities in the 1980s because the economic situation was very bad, and so the pressure on land, urban land in English cities was very low. So it happened. You can see in Manchester or in Liverpool or even in London, in very central parts of the city, of these cities, some very low-rise development of two-story or even one-story being built in the 1980s because the land value was so low in this period. So at that time, so when you make converging the micro-histories and geopolitics, the Mayor of London was elected with this idea of bringing a new planning document, the London Plan, putting the density in the heart of the new planning of the city, and it wanted to develop a very growth-focused agenda, accommodating growth. London has a history of not accommodating growth. London has a history of exporting growth with the green belt, with the new towns and expanding towns, has a history of exporting growth elsewhere in the UK. So this time around, the idea is to accommodate growth, keep growth, and build a dense city to accommodate growth. The idea is that with the density, you have some very strong agglomeration economies. The proximity is improving productivity, etc., etc. So this idea was a quite liberal kind of idea, but supported by a left-wing politician. So a growth agenda, and a growth agenda to attract public money. It was one of the most striking point of this municipality, and it was also widely covered by the literature in political sciences. The Mayor of London introduced a new rapport de force. It's like a boxing game with the government at that time, to have to get the most money from the state at that moment. So the mayor obtained the Olympic Games in 2005. They were organized in 2012, but he obtained them from the Labour government, from Tony Blair. He obtained also investment into public transportation. He obtained a lot of money and a lot of new infrastructures that allowed for growth in densities. And that was what lacking London was the capacity of the public transportation to accommodate this growth. So he managed to get that money, and high-rise and verticalization was one of the means to be really, really visible in terms of how you transform the city. So the beginning of the verticalization process was mainly marked by a very iconic kind of architectures, big names architects, Richard Rogers, Norman Foster, also Ian Simpson, and a lot of other big names architects, from Raphael Vinoli as well, or Jean Nouvel. And all those big names served this idea of marketing a new city with a new landscape of power, as Sharon Zuckin said in his books. And this idea of marking, but also marking not only for investors, but for the states, to gain attention from the state, to gain some money to develop the city. And the Olympic Games were the very strong moment where with these games, they could transform highly the assemble new lands and transform large patches of the city. So this is the starting point. And then obviously because they wanted these towers. I remember the public inquiry for the Shard, this magnificent tower of Renzo Piano on the banks of the Thames. These high-rise were highly contested between 2001 and 2007. It was contested again by different bodies like English Heritage, but also by local residents, communities. And finally, this high-rise was completed because the Mayor of London at that time, Richard Rogers, Ken Livingstone, with the help of Richard Rogers, they managed to let part of the tower for Transport for London, for the institution that organized and planned the transport in the city. So it was how the public money was flowing to guarantee, to put some money into a speculative development that was the Shard at that time. So they had this project. There was also a point where these high-rises were developing and creating a precedent. A lot of new developers emerged because they saw that the risk was not that high. They proposed some high-rises elsewhere in the city, mainly in the central area of the city, but also elsewhere. And the London Plan, this new document that was proposed by the municipality of London and wanted by the mayor of London, a sort of long-term plan, planning for growth and density and public transportation, making this city a much more dense public transport dependent than car dependent. So the high rises were entering also the discourse justification for a much more environmentally friendly agenda around densification and transit oriented development, TODs. That was the previous title of my presentation. I've dropped this in the title because my point went wider than that. So the transit-oriented development, and all this would mean that the London Plan identifies some very accessible location in the city, highly accessible location with a high level of land availability, and by mixing accessibility levels and land availability, they decide to provide for very specific points of densification with the construction of high rises. And the high rises serve a purpose of making an impact on the landscape of the city and transforming the landscape. So to make the things clearer for the developers and to organize and make and assess the capacities of all these areas of London for the developers, the municipality of London changed its planning regime, and they used the negotiating planning. They use new planning policies like opportunity areas, which are areas where the municipality identify underutilized land, what they call underutilized. So primarily, this is logistic land. This is all industrial land. They help for land assembly. They help for marketing these areas, and they allow for the redevelopment of these areas. And verticalization helps make much more legible and visible the urban regeneration. And this strategy has worked very well in terms of if you use the criteria of high-rise building, not specifically in terms of equity, in terms of inclusiveness, but if you use the criteria as, do these opportunity areas allow for the construction of high-rises and a big number of high-rises? The answer is yes, it is working, and developers go and build these high-rises in this area, because also there is a lot of money to fix in real estate assets. I'm sure we'll talk about it with Huana later on, and César as well. And now we're entering the phase, the normalization phase, I would say, where high-rise residential building as one of the norm that is used when you create a new developing areas. Why is it normal? Because 35% of the housing provision in London in 2018 was covered by high-rises. And this is more than 50% in the central area of London. This is one of the most obvious solutions now to create value on different typologies of sites, from small sites to urban projects, from brownfield sites, from contaminated sites, reclaimed sites, especially for these brownfield contaminated sites where public body is not paying for this. So developers, they use on small plot of land, they decontaminate the land, and the cost of decontamination is used in the increasing in height and the importance of market prices apartments. In this 20-year period, or 15 years, maybe more, major national house builders have developed a technical, financial, and managerial expertise for high-rise markets, for renting, for construction, for maintenance, and for being also, I would say, gestionnaire, condo governance of condos. Local authorities have also developed an expertise, and as well as national, international, and individual investors are now familiar with the Highrise solution. And in this period of normalization, we can also talk about a period of dependence, because from the year 2010 to now, the contraction of the state subsidies to local authorities has opened up much more dependence of local authorities to planning, to developers, because the public money is less important for local authorities. Local authorities have the right, by planning gains, to ask developers from some money for them to construct social housing, or to construct bus stations, etc., etc. So they can extract money from local developers. And when the state gives some money, the local authorities are not necessarily dependent on developers. But when the money from the state is disappearing, vanishing, the local authorities tend to develop a strategy of attracting developers. They develop strategies to attract more money from the same kind of project, and they tend to have policies that are much more accommodating to developers than in other conditions. So this is a question. This normalization goes also with a sort of dependence of local authorities to this kind of development. And because also there is a tendency, the high rises tend to be solutions that can be tweaked to cater for different kind of sites, small, larger, and multi-ownership. They are used highly. So I was from this theoretical. I think I don't have much more time. As I can see my screen, Christian is saying that at 20 minutes. So I have to. I just want to conclude with the next slides, because on this, from this theoretical framework that I've shown you, with the staging from the starting point from the verticalization, then the normalization, now the dependence on that, using micro histories, but also local geopolitics. Also, the question of the neoliberal city and governance and financialization, which are the main theoretical frameworks that are theoretical references that are framed in that idea. I would like to try to test this framework on suburban areas, and especially suburban areas in specific context, of continuing in the London context. Suburban areas are, if you take a very rapid definition that I have, that I'm proposing you now, suburbs are mid-90s modes of urbanization in the form of lower density, with a relative monofunctionality and dependence to an urban center that provide jobs and amenity. Suburbs also refer to the individualistic way of living of the middle classes that value green spaces and access to nature post-World War II. This is a general kind of definition. In the context of London, or in the context of polycentric metropolitan areas. And I don't know if in the case, we can discuss that with the case of Sao Paulo and the case of Brazilian city, if we can consider that there are polycentric development. In the case of London, we have a metropolitan geography of suburbanization anchored on villages and market towns in a 15 to 100 kilometers radius since the 1920s. So we have a very strong network of medium-sized cities that have been the anchors of growth from the 1950s and 60s. So today, with the history of new towns, green belts, etc., you have on the network kind of map to the right, you have this you have the cartography of the commuters, so the people that work from one place to another in the southeast of England, around London, and you see that how London is still a magnet in this area, but how the cities in between them are also playing like magnets and attracting a lot of people, because they have a lot of employment jobs as well around London, in airports, in business parks, in the headquarters. For instance, if you look at the headquarters of the main companies based in England, London is no more the place for headquarters because it's too expensive. And so headquarters are based in business parks around in these cities, 50, 60, 70 kilometers from London. So this is a polycentric kind of stellar kind of metropolitan geography. So in that context, we can continue with this context to try to address the trends that are emerging at the moment. The suburban areas in the southeast, but that's true also in other polycentric areas. I'm thinking about Amsterdam and Rotterdam as well, in the same position. The difficulties of the core of the metropolis to address a balanced growth are very clear in the case of London. We had, with all this densification agenda, growth agenda, we had a lot of densification, but with the same imbalances of homes and jobs, a strong residentialization of inner London, but also more office space. The planning regime is focused on providing homes and jobs through creating real estate value, but it does not improve affordability for the middle and low income households. And also for low profitability activities. And we had also delayed in transport infrastructures investment and on a high level of congestion. Financialization and flow are continuing, and all of this is pushing all the money, pushing all the people right in the suburbs. That's why we have this, the linkages I'm doing with the suburbs is that the people, the high qualification kind of jobs, they are moving also in the suburbs. The money, the international money from the Middle East, money from Asia is also moving in the suburbs. And so we'll just conclude by two rapid images. First of all, this is Basildon. This is a new town built in the 1950s, 60s, a new town that was built to the east of London. And you see the center of Basildon. It's just a ring of highways, a small train station here with commuters going into London. And inside that, you have parking lots, shopping centers, and office buildings as well, with big car parks. So you have centrality based on automobile. And all these places with a very difficult kind of land ownership, which is very small ownership, parking lots as well, different ownership as well. And for Basildon, you have a project, which is a project for high density and also vertical development, that's to transform the entire shopping area and to build several thousand apartments and to rebuild the station. And the other case study is Woking in the southwest of London, which is a small town, small settlement, a small town of 40,000 inhabitants. And in this town, the local municipality, which is conservative, has used a new public company to supervise the reorganization and the regeneration of the town center. And they went with developers from Malaysia and money from Malaysia, and now building this new shopping center with high-rise residential towers and small flats in a very family-orientated kind of suburbs. And so this is a new pioneering front of verticalization in the suburbs, so something that I would like also to share in discussions. I'm sorry I've been late, 25 minutes. Many thanks for your patience, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Manuel. So I'd like to ask Julio Arroyo to start his presentation. Then we are going to comment all the presentations in the end of after all the presentation have been presented. Sorry. So Julio, thank you. We cannot hear you. Julio, I think your mic is off.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I start my presentation. Sorry, is it okay? Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, we can hear you and we can see your presentation.
Ah, you can see my presentation. Okay.
Yes.
Verticalization in Santa Fe, Argentine. Transformations in the unequal city. Very quickly, we live here. Santa Fe is in South America, 500 kilometers to the northwest of Buenos Aires. Santa Fe is about 440,000 inhabitants. It's a middle-range city. Its economy is public administration. It's the capital of a province in Argentina. And services, retail, education, industry. But as you perhaps know, Argentina is a very dramatic country. And we have, at the same time, in the city, an average income. So we have a middle-class city, but with a poverty population, which is about 42.6% right now because of the amount of two crises, the financial crisis and the pandemic crisis. So it's a city with different kinds of troubles, but it has some kind of characteristics. Santa Fe is a nation city. It was founded in 1573. And since the very beginning of the settlement of the city, we recognize the urban grid, the damero in Spanish, as the structural element of the city. As you can see in this very ancient plan, the city is a regular grid. And also, this characteristic, this feature of the city is also visible nowadays. The grid is 100 meters by 100 meters. There are about 40 plots in each urban block. The name in Spanish is manzana, and regularly these plots are private properties. So we have a urban space organized over the idea of the cuadra and the esquina. Cuadra is the distance, but at the same time, the street space from one corner to the other corner. So the specialty of the city is organized on the sequence of the 100 meters block. You cross the street, you 100 meters more, and that's very regular, either in one sense and in the other. And the other important point in the grid is the intersection of the streets, the esquina, the corner. So the city is organized since the very beginning of its existence on this idea of the regular rhythms and the orthogonality. These characteristics give the city continuity through the diversity. Of course, the city is not equal in terms of socio-demographic and socio-economical segregation in the urban plan, but the grid is a continuity, is a factor of continuity, and you can move all around the city following the streets. Another characteristic I want to point out is that there are some kind of tensions between the abstract concept of the grid, very regular or absolutely orthogonal, and the importance of the concrete elements of the fabric. In this case, the possibility architects have in order to introduce in the urban fabric singular elements that make concrete the abstraction of the grid. I hope you may understand me. This kind of cities, Santa Fe is a very typical Argentinian city. It promotes imaginaries. Which are the hegemonic imaginaries? Are those of the middle class. The imaginaries of the middle classes are the preference of the value of the private property, the expectation of the social mobility, and the ideals of modernization and progress. These are very strong in the constitution of the national social cultural characteristics in Argentina. It was said that Argentina used to be a middle class country. So, of course, the capitalistic development of the city produces socio-physical segregations. Those segregations allows us to recognize different neighborhoods. The central area, which is very mixed-use area, the traditional middle-class neighborhoods, the popular neighborhoods, the low-income people, and the residential for the upper classes. The concept of the neighborhood and the experience of the neighborhoods in Argentinian city is very strong also. In the regular language and the everyday language, we reference each other according where do you live, which neighborhood do you live in. We can make our references to the city. We may construct our mental maps according to this topography of neighborhoods. The introduction of high-rise buildings in the city is very early. In the 30s, we began to see these kind of buildings, as you see at the left in the image. And the high-rise building was a particular intervention in the regular urban fabric of the city, according to the process of densification of the city and the consolidation of a real estate market. And I want to point out this relationship, which was very important until the 90s, until the end of the last century in the city. The relationship between the middle classes, the central area, the high rise, because the high rise was a good complement of the idea of progress and modernization that was inherent in the middle class cultural expectations. And the area of the city where these high-rise buildings appeared first was the central area, because the core of the city, the central of the city, is very strong in Santa Fe and in most of the Argentinian cities. And it's okay, that's what I wanted to say. There is a connection, a very strong connection between middle class expectations, central area, and the high rise as the representation of the progress in the city and also the valorization of the urban land and so on. But even so, it was very strong also the idea of an open city from the point of view of the liberal conception of a democratic, an open city, a city for everybody, even recognizing that everybody were aware of differences. But we had a period of investments, and where the capital from? Okay, we have capital invested in city, in real estate, in coming from the private sector, but it's also important the public funds and the non-profit entities. So, in general, cities in Argentina move according to the hinterlands. There was a close relationship between the city and the rural areas, where rural areas that produce a good rent that allow the investment in the city. Private sector, as you can read there, gives urban rent, rural rent, and bank financing under the legal form of the condominium. That was very common, and in some cases there were interesting experiments, architectural proposals, as you can see there. So the private sector was very active in the production of the high-rise buildings, but also was the public funds, the state, giving the opportunity for many people to get affordable houses through mortgage loans. This is the example of a very big neighborhood of the last quarter of the 20th century in Santa Fe. And when I talk about non-profit entities, I refer to unions, union labors, or cooperative mutuals that use to save money and give soft credits for their associated. So we have a city with different, with a logic of reproduction based on the capital reproduction, but at the same time with an idea of this democratic, open, and a city that tries to manage its contradictions, and it was more or less the same through all the 20th century, except in two extraordinary moments of our national history. Which were the moments, the opportunities for the neoliberalism to be introduced not only in the economy of the country, but also in the culture of the country. The first moment was the military dictatorship, 1976 to 1983, sorry, it's wrong there. Well, that you may know, it was a horrible time, a dark time of repression and missing people, but also of the opening of the economy after a development process in the national economy. But the second time, perhaps the more important from the point of view of the introduction of the neoliberal policies, was the Carlos Menem presidency. The President Carlos Menem introduced a brutal and very deep transformation of the nation in a very short time. In less than a year, there was a massive privatization of state companies, unusual strengthening of the financial sector, the beginning of primarization of the economy because of the commodities that remains till now, and the idea of the extractivism, the legitimization of the extractivism as a way of using the common goods. So, according to the neoliberal discourses, there are imaginaries, new imaginaries. First of all, individualism, privatism, consumerism, and hedonism is a sequence of interrelated concepts that makes an extraordinary change in the conception of the city. Of course, in the conception, in the idea of city, also in Santa Fe. Public realm was considered a dangerous milieu. On the difference, the alterity became a source of fear. In a short time, we began to feel fear, to be afraid of the other. The second characteristic is the urban discontinuity, because the idea of the enclosure, in order to get exclusive sales and sophisticated environments, just for to live in a safe place and in a more fashionable places, or for shopping areas and so on. It was even more strong the idea of a city as a niche for business opportunities because of the commodification of urban scale, traditional environments, the commodification of the symbolic elements, natural places, etc. And there was a change of the conception from the liberal citizenship to the customer, the targeted customer. Fourth, the socioeconomic segmentation. No more middle class as a main aspirational model, but as segments of inhabitants, groups of people according their consumer expectations and level of incomes. High income people have two options. I am talking about the around the end of the last century. There were two options: to give up the city, move into the country clubs. That was absolutely new for us, absolutely new, to go away from the city and to go to a suburban gated communities. It was very, very innovative way of life. Or to remain in city, but in vertical communities. And for average income people, there was the option of affordable vertical dwellings. The last characteristic of this neoliberal imaginaries is long to explain, but is the assumption that the real estate investment is a way of it's like a defense against the recurring financial crisis in Argentina. You know, we have several and very deep and dramatic financial crises. And so the idea of the bricks that will, the bricks will make your money safe. Right? So with the neoliberalization of the country, we began a new concept of high-rise, which is the verticalization. I make a difference between high-rise buildings and verticalizations. And I put the division between one concept and the other in the neoliberalism, or in the neoliberalization of the economy and the culture of the country. With the verticalization, we began to talk about the privatopia, the private city, in tension with the public, open, democratic city. Towers now are on behalf of the high-rise buildings. The concept of the tower is more exclusive, and from the point of, from an architectural point of view, it's a more isolated element. in comparison with the high-rise buildings. So no more high-rise buildings in the block, but residential self-sufficient complexes in special large lots in vacant areas. The ideal figure, the legal resource here is the negotiation between public-private, because we have the figure of the urban agreement, and I don't know how to translate in English, the fideicomiso, which is a little bit different like the condominium. So with these new elements, we have a new conception of the high-rise building, which is not a singular element in the manzana, in the urban block, but a complex of elements. Like in this case, the name, as you may see there, is Paseo del Molino. It's right off the mill. Molino is mill, industry. In an old mill in Santa Fe, which remained in the middle of the city, the socialist government in the 10 years ago recovered the place and introduced these structures. Proposed there a very interesting cultural fabric, as you can say in the title, El Molino Fábrica Cultural. So this is a mill still now, but for cultural element, for cultural fabrications. So this is a new place where there was a vacant area, where there was a disrupted place in the city. So the area got a full new spirit because of the introduction of this activity here, with the introduction of this kind of forms, new forms in the city, and new uses where there were just a vacant area, a depressed space. So the transformation of the area was very strong, very creative, and this is the argument this huge development uses in order to give its own identity. The name of the intervention is Paseo del Molino, trying to make a clear semantic relationship with what is just in front. But the idea is to generate, of course, an island of private life within the consolidated area. So there is an appropriation. Here is the concept of extractivism we are trying to use here. The appropriation of what? Of social value, of public space, and also the appropriation of architectural forms in such a way. There are in this, for us, huge intervention, considering the scale of the city, considering we are about 500,000 people, inhabitants. It is not a big city. It's not a global city. It's a very provincial city. But so these kind of interventions are for us an important, disruptive, and very strong intervention in the city, a hard intervention in the city. So the privatopia is, from the point of from a cultural point of view, needs some kind of sublimation. Yes, this is private, but we have to make it a little bit public, because there is some kind of a remanent idea that is not absolutely good, the concept of private as exclusivity. So this complex introduces or recovers the idea of the street, the ground level, recovers the idea of the public space by means of the of the concept of the activity in the public state, the spontaneous activities, and also the active side, because they propose there in the ground level, retails, and so on. But 2 or 3 floors up, over the top of the parking area, there is what they call a plaza. The plaza, a square. The square is in the Spanish Foundation city. It's the case of Santa Fe, of course. It's a foundational element, a structural element also, beside the grid. The plaza, the square, is a real core of the grid. So the idea of the plaza is the more fulfill idea of the publicness. So they use the name plaza just to refer to a very private garden, which is on the top of the parking lots. They are trying to generate a new ground level, but it is not at the street level, but 2 or 3 floors over the street level. And this is private, but at the same time, they are using the Molino, the Molino Fábrica Cultural, as an extension of the public private domain. And of course, all the elements of the comfort, safety, and also the long vision, the vision of the sky, are present here, introducing the characteristic lifestyle of Privatopia, which is very homogeneous throughout the world. This is not the only case. We have several cases in this moment under development, and it is surprising these developments are running well, even in the nowadays conditions, financial crisis and health crisis. But for instance, these buildings are taking care of their location in front of the river, and these ones, well, as you can see there, with amenities and so on. In the case of the verticalization in the harbor of the city, which is under a renewal, is a parodia, a kind of a small Puerto Madero in Santa Fe, but the logic is just the same. That's what is important to point out. There is a common logic and a different manifestation of the impact of the capital and the financialization of the city in this moment. And what I try to explain is that the verticalization is a little bit different. It's not just the case of making a higher building, but it's a way of representate a different conception of the city. Right? So, to finish, I want to say that verticalization is not the same as Highrise in my hypothesis. The Argentinian cities, from which Santa Fe is a typical case, is an irregular capitalistic reproduction of the city. Why? Because Argentina has so many distortions in its developments that we can recognize the logic of the capital in the reproduction of the city, but at the same time, we must recognize how diverse is capitalism in Argentina. The presence, the incidence of the state is very strong, even in the case or in the periods where neoliberal was the hegemonic discourse, for instance, in the previous period of President Mauricio Macri. Inequality, for instance, has different meanings. In the case of the middle class of the 20th century, and in the segmented society of the 21st century. So these are the elements I want to propose to discuss, or just if you had interest, I had some references, and I dropped for you an annex with different graphics of the evolution of the high rise in the city, just in case some of you be interested in. I thank you very, very much to Christian and Manuel and all the team of Highrise in Leon and in Sao Paulo, Sao Carlos, for the opportunity of being part of the team, but also for the opportunity of being in this panel with you. I want to thank you very, very much for your attention.
Thank you, Julio, for your presentation. I'd like to call Huana Carvalho for her presentation. Thank you, Huana.
Hello.
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 Yes, we are listening.
Okay, nice. May I start? So
yes, you can, and we are seeing your presentation too. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I'm pleased to present a part of the research we developed with César Simone in the context of the Highrise project. The presentation will highlight the relations between the urban phenomenon of verticalization and the economic phenomenon of financialization. We propose to observe them by the housing development in São Paulo metropolitan area between 1985 and 2019. With this presentation, I will try to respond the following questions. Is there any relationship between verticalization and financialization in the housing production of São Paulo metropolitan area? Which ones could evolutions about this relationship be perceived over time? How does the place of housing policy evolve in this context? A theoretical response to explain urban verticalization and financialization comes from the land theory. Building verticalization is a typological solution to multiply the possibilities of land use. Under a capitalist perspective, it enables an increase of land productivity concerning property creation. As the land rent concerns the property production by the land use, the verticalization could be a building feature in increasing land rent. The verticalization can be functional to the land rent, especially concerning dynamic real estate markets where other marketplace productivity must be considered. Like any other capitalist product, the financing model of the real estate property affects its forms of production and consumption. But a particular relationship arises in the context between real estate market and financial markets due to the rentier logic present in the activities of both groups of actors. According to David Harvey, we could explain urban financialization by the rentier linking between finance and the development activities based on land rent. High-rise buildings in business districts worldwide are the most obvious example result from this configuration, in which verticalization and financialization appear, especially seen in critical context of bubble broke. Considering the valuable inputs of the land rent theory, we defined a simple protocol to develop our fieldwork concerning the house development in São Paulo metropolitan area. For this part of the research, we worked on two materials. The real estate database produced by Embraesp and accessed under license. It's a market database comprising housing laws dating back to 1985, and official documents concerning criteria for granting state subsidies for housing. By our questions, nourished by the theoretical inputs, we treated the database in order to identify the following trends. verticalization and geographical centralization and sprawling, the relation of these trends with financing evolutions in the housing market, and all these relations concerning affordable housing. One note, usually the literature identifies affordable housing with subsidized housing. In our study, we consider as affordable housing all housing lots corresponding to the reference prices of subsidized housing. So we can capture the housing production in São Paulo metropolitan area from the perspective of verticalization in this first heat map. It concerns all the housing launches listed in the IAU-USP database. The housing units are grouped according to the launch year and the number of floors of the building associated with the dwellings. So each square represents a sum of housing units whose size is given by a color scale from yellow to red. The dwellings are grouped according to the launch year, appear on the x-axis, and also according to the building height given by the number of floors associated to the dwellings as indicated on the y-axis. From 1985 to 2019, the data confirms what we already knew. Verticalization is not a recent phenomenon in São Paulo metropolitan area. If the verticalization is not new, it appears as a process in evolution. We can observe a concentration of dwellings launched between 1996 and 1997, more associated with buildings up to 20 stores. Then, after 2007, another large concentration associated with higher buildings up to 28 stores. We can also observe this step change discretely appearing at the beginning of the 2000s. This contradictory information is due to the fact this chart hides two geographical trends. The concentration areas of housing production indicated for all metropolitan area almost disappear in this other chart concerning dwellings launched only in São Paulo city. In contrast, it's more evident the transition from a higher pattern of apartment buildings at the beginning of 2000. So, in São Paulo city, we can observe a step change concerning the apartment buildings heights, which comprise the most significant number of launched dwellings around 2000. About the heat map concerning the housing lots only outside the capital, it clearly shows the step change in building heights fixed in 2007. The increase in housing production for 96, 97, and after 2007 is very much due to the peripheral production characterized by building verticalization. For Carolina Castro and Lúcia Chimbo, there is a real continuity between the two moments. Although the actors responsible for the jump in the housing production of the end of the 90s were housing cooperatives, and the actors after 2007 comprised national developers capitalized in the stock market, both actors were proposing a similar product to middle and low middle income groups. The two moments could be considered then as two stages in the creation of an affordable housing model relying on vertical buildings settled in the metropolitan periphery of São Paulo. Getting into the issue of financialization, supported by other research, we can contextualize the housing development of São Paulo metropolitan area, considering the evolutions in the finance sphere of the real estate market. The temporal arc of the database is already a sign of this evolution. 1988 and 1985 was the final year for the militarist regime, which had begun by a coup in 1964. 1986 was the year of the National Housing Bank's extinction in a context of a profound institutional and national economic crisis. For 20 years, this public bank had piloted the Brazilian housing policy as its main financial actor. Also worldwide, the new round of economic internationalization spurred the emergence of corporate environment demanding novel urban space uses. The context finished in numerous crashes. For example, in Japan and France, the real estate developments of the second half of the 80s ended with the burst of the real estate bubble at the beginning of the 90s. In the Brazilian case, the first half of the 90s was characterized by economic rearrangements in order to create better conditions for the investment context. Real estate investment trusts were legally created in June 1993. An exemplary project related to this context is the Panambi. The project included the construction of a neighborhood for high-income classes and a gated community on the Pinheiros river banks. Despite this example, the new instrument had a limited impact in the real estate market, mostly related to other products, like malls and hotels. In the second half of the 90s, the inflation control after the introduction of a new currency in the Brazilian economy in 94 gave new impetus to the investment context, and a new real estate financing system based on financial markets was created in 1907. As shown by Luciana Royer's dissertation, the financing system also had a limited impact and focused on other real estate projects. So, the other side of the coin of this evolution, it seems to be the rise of the self-financing model for middle and lower middle classes in the metropolitan periphery of São Paulo between 1996 and 1997. Despite the precedent finance evolutions, as it was analyzed by a vast literature, remarkably by Beatriz Rufino and Lúcia Chimbo, the turning point for the Brazilian housing development, considering not also São Paulo, but the national context, was the developers' capitalization on the stock market. 15 Brazilian real estate developers capitalized on the stock markets between 2005 and 2009. 10 of them were headquartered in São Paulo. The improvement of housing credit conditions allows the extension of these large developers to new markets. This is indicated by this chart presenting the credit evolution by nominal values. Besides the creation of the Ministry of the City in 2003, regulatory changes at the beginning of the Works Party's governments provided better funding conditions through these two principal sources of housing credit: the Brazilian Saving and Loan System, SBPE, and the Employment Time Guarantee Fund, FGTS. Composed by the private funds of saving accounts managed by the bank market in favor of high and higher middle income strata, the SBPE turned more driven to housing credit supply pushed by public regulation. Similarly, the FGTS, assembling workers' savings accounts compulsorily paid by the employers, was driven by the states towards the affordable housing placement. The dimension of these interventions is visible in the figures of the housing credit evolution after 2005. However, two trends are observed after 2014. Both funds grew up until 2014, but the credits for high-income households represented by SBPE appears enhanced comparing to the credit for middle and low middle income strata represented by FGTS between 2006 and 2014. In contrast, after 2014, we can observe a sharp decline in the housing credit with different trends manifested for each funding. Whether the market funding of the SBPE declines, the state-controlled funding of FGTS remained stable. These trends in this last critical period of 2015-2019 bring up again the question about the housing policy's role for the market development. Coming back to São Paulo metropolitan area and introduce price values in our chart, we can observe the metropolitan market follows the national trends. The graphic above indicates the financial flux associated with the housing launches, followed by the sum of the values in millions of reals corrected by inflation. We can clearly see the same national behavior according to financial flux for 2007, 2040, and 2015 to 2019. Splitting the chart again to consider the metropolitan localization of the housing launching, the capital and outside, as before, but also considering the housing price of subsidized housing, we can show the knowledge of this new critical context. For the first period, the growing context in São Paulo's markets signified a geographical sprawling outside the capital. This geographical extension relied more on a free market housing production not associated with subsidized dwellings. The so-called affordable housing is present in the peripheral production, but in a limited way, especially in the financial crisis moments of 2008-2009. The affordable housing production is strengthened more recently, confirming the national trend. What we did not see by the national data, and we see here, it's this affordable housing which has been constructed in more central location than in the previous period. The increasing importance of the affordable housing in this critical context is also confirmed by the values associated with this production. In the biennium of 2050-2060, the annual mean of launch values corrected by inflation decreased to around 50% compared with the annual mean of the growth period. The new housing market started to grow again in a limited way in the biennial 2007-2008, and the retracted offer finally launched in 2019, reducing the distance given by the annual means of launch values between the recent period, the last 5 years, and the growth period of 2007-2040. In this context, affordable housing represents around 23% of launched dwellings for the biennial, the first biennial of 2015-2016, and half of the launched dwellings for the next triennial. With regard to the financial values, this corresponds to a progression in the market participation of affordable housing from around 10 to 21%. This new trend is very particular in its arrangement. A macro context of crisis with sectorial support for subsidized housing from one side, and a construction based on vertical buildings and centralized locations from other. It's possible now to resume our research findings for this part of the research. For the roll period of 2009, we confirmed the indications of Carolina and Lucia concerning the step change in the vertical typology by means of the building's height, which comprised the most significant number of launched dwellings. The growing periods of 1997 and 2007-2014 favored the high-rise growth outside São Paulo city. The building's height passed from up to 20 floors to up to 28 floors from the moment featured by housing cooperatives to the moment featured by large developers relying on financial markets. Considering the housing development under stock market's influence after 2007, we can indicate two different trends. For the growth context of 2007-2014, it's possible to relate this context to the strengthening of verticalization trends in the whole São Paulo metropolitan area, especially concerning higher income strata. For the critical context, the housing development is associated with a verticalization in more centralized locations and significantly comprising affordable housing. The correlation between centrality constitution, and building verticalization is often explained as an expression of the interaction between factors such as land price, location advantage, and solvable demand. The novelty for the recent trend is that combination of factors arises in the form of an affordable housing relatively well situated. From the perspective of the housing policy, we have to analyze this new trend. We must to analyze this new trend carefully. It occurs in a critical context traversing different dimensions: economic, social, political, institutional, and so on. After the parliamentary coup of President Dilma Rousseff, if the states represented by the last government continued to support credit conditions for middle-income strata, budgetary resource for social housing dropped to almost zero. After also housing developers, bankruptcy, stock exchange exits, mergers, and splits, the relations between housing development and financial markets evolved. The number of developers in the both stock markets from 2009 to 2019 passed from 15 to 8. We could then question if this recent verticalization trend poses a new stage for the study of financialization and housing policy in the Brazilian context. And I finish here. It's not the end of our research, but I finish here with all the references. And in 20 minutes, I imagine, I think.
Okay, thank you, Huana. Yes, it was in 20 minutes. Thank you very much for your presentation. Then I would like to call Beatriz Rufino to the last presentation of our panel today. Thank you, Bia. So I'm here until you to test your microphone and your screen. We can see your presentation.
Perfect. Could you see me?
Yes, we can see and we can listen you. Okay, thank you, Bia.
So thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Manuel Alves for the invitation, and also thanks all the team of the Highrise team, research team, and also congratulate Manuel for this very interesting project. And also it's an enormous pleasure to be here with Juana, César, Lucia, that are colleagues that we have been discussed these themes. And also it's a pleasure to meet the new colleagues as well, and Julio. I think my presentation has a lot of connections with Juana, so we could have a lot of interesting debate. My idea is to present the title of my presentation is the expansion and crisis in real estate restructure. What's new in the diffusion and concentrations of investment? These presentations, it's a result of a former project that ended in 2018, in November 2018, and also bring some preliminary results of the next one that started just last year. So it's just like some preliminary ideas that I try to present to you to promote a debate. So we depart from this idea of real estate restructure that is first developed by Pereira in 2005, and then Lencioni brings some ideas. But the concept comes from the perception that urban change based on real estate dynamics. So encompassing an understanding of the specificities of real estate accumulation, which is simultaneously supported by immediate process of real estate valorization, and also associated with the global dimension of accumulation by the notion of restructure. So, and strongly connected with the increasing power of finance. So I try to develop here is this idea of real estate restructuring as a continuous process, and also as a social and special process. So analyzing this idea, I will discussing the forms of productions, the agent and accumulation strategies, the products, so also the profit forms, and also the general reconfiguration in the metropolitan area, discussing this both tendencies that have been discussed here in this session, the urban expansion, urban sprawl, and also the urban renewal. So our reflections will be developing considering the metropolitan of São Paulo, but also very focused in the 2001 century, where we identify this process of real estate restructure in Brazil more broadly and more specifically in São Paulo. Juana already mentioned all this idea of change that it started in the last decade of 20th century. So we could talk about an adjustment phase till 2006, 2007, when we have the IPOs also commented by Luana, and we have this very debated phase of expansions of real estate production that I think that have extensively started, discussed, and is really connected with My Home, My Life project. That is this huge house project. But here we mainly try to focus in this transition between expansion and crisis, very connected with Brazilian economic crisis in 2014, 2015. And also what we're trying to discuss here is this idea that the crisis not representing a complete or a rupture in this process of real estate restructure. So we see this real estate restructure as a continuous process, and our aim here is analyze the new dynamic which appears from the economic crisis. Our hypothesis is that the economic crisis cannot be seen as a rupture in the real estate restructuring process. On the contrary, the restructured agents, sectors, institutions tend to explore the crisis through new real estate products, strategies of accumulation, reinforcing the financialization and the intensification of the role of the rent capture in the accumulation process in the real estate. So just to illustrate very briefly what I mean by the crisis is a crisis in the economy as a whole, but it's even stronger in the construction sector. But it's important to reinforce that here we also consider the infrastructure that was also heavily affected by the crisis. But what is new and is important to highlight also is unprecedented reduction in interest rates that we have seen mainly after 2018 to now. But now it seems that we have some change in the moment. But what's interesting to discuss also about this crisis period, that we could identify a general stabilization in profit price. That is a situation that is completely different in the expansion price period, where we have this really strong appreciation. And in the crisis, we had already some moments of depreciation. But what's interesting in the analysis of this data is that São Paulo has a stronger process of appreciation, valorization after 2018, in somehow disconnected with the other metropolis. So the hypothesis that come in a first analysis of that is that São Paulo is becoming more important in the crisis period. And it's that we try to analyze in our contribution. So we are mainly discuss the São Paulo metropolis in this period, in this transition between expansions and crisis, and we depart from the metropolitan reconfiguration, discussing this process of diffusion and concentration of investment, for after discuss the relation between products, and here we say that maybe we are emphasize more the idea of condominiums than the verticalization, but they are very connected with changing the forms of production. So we have the hypothesis of the condominium metamorphosis, and also we have this idea of the new role of rent business in the production and the real estate production in the city of São Paulo. So about metropolitan reconfiguration, then some data related with our first project. We are really concerned in this project to see the role of these large developers and how they are important in the conductions, in the chains, in differentiation in terms of spatial dynamics, but also in terms of new products. So we highlighted here the public traded developers, the big ones, and a second group that are large developers, but they are not connected with stock market. But when we start them and discuss them, we see a lot of different connections with financial markets, financial instruments. And what's interesting when we compare the expansion period with the crisis period is the power of these publicly traded developers in the expansion, but the diversification of large developers in the crisis. So the second group appear with more strength in the second period, the crisis period, than before. And what is interesting also, and this is we are looking here just for the production of this big company that's concentrated more or less 50% of the production in the period of expansion. So what we see in the period of expansion is clearly that we have, when we compare the expansion with the crisis period, we see a movement of recentralization, concentration in the city of São Paulo, but with another level of prices, high prices, and also what's interesting to highlight is the predominance of small apartments. In the beginning, small apartments appear with very common in the peripheries out of São Paulo, in the border of the metropolis. And now they became common here also. And we will discuss, because I think there are a lot of interesting relations with what Huana just presented for us. But when we examine and bring the data to 2019, what's really is interesting that this crisis period has some kind of boom in the 2 last years, and also some news indicating that 2020, in the middle of this COVID crisis, we already have this kind of boom, and the number of launches is already, it's also very high. We have this extraordinary concentration in the city of São Paulo, both in the number of house units and also in terms of launched value. But what's interesting when we discuss this period is that we could understand this restructure as a continuous process of accumulation, but is maintained by opposite dynamics, as we could see in this graphic that showed the densification coefficient in the metropolitan area of São Paulo. So in the black, we have the densification in the city of São Paulo, the median densification in the city of São Paulo. And what we could see, it's a high concentration, increased densification mainly after 2015, in a dynamic that's opposite what is happening in the border of the metropolis. So what is interesting to highlight is that in the expansive process, the densification in the peripheries are really important. And now we have like the opposite, the increase, the densification in the metropolis of São Paulo, the city of São Paulo. But what's interesting to see, what does mean exactly what we call about densification in the city in São Paulo, because the densification is also very concentrated in some places of the city, and also is very marked by this small, the spread of this small apartment. And even a confusion because we could see a small apartment, as Juana said, is a trend of affordable house, but not in the very good locations in the city. It's in the city of São Paulo, but it's normally more in the periphery of the city. But we have, and this is what I will try to highlight, this strong concentration in the axis. I think this theme has been already discussed here in the symposium. And it's important to highlight that these concentrations mean also the creation of a new product. The creation of new product is not a novelty when we trying to put the history of condominiums in São Paulo in a kind of timeline, or we already have other new projects that are related with boom periods. But what we try to highlight is this increased sophistication of this project in terms of concentrations of capitals. In 2019, it's in the expansion periods, the condominium clubs are really common, and it's the kind of privatopia that Julio talked before. But what we're seeing now, and this is what I will call the condominium metamorphosis, is this new kind of condominium that appear in the process of concentrations of investment in São Paulo. And why I'm talking about a metamorphosis in the condominium? Because I'm considering radical transformations in the forms of valorization ensured by this new product. So it's in a way that this kind of condominium is articulating strategies that already been used in previous ones, the construction intensifications, the idea of facilities that are even more sophisticated. For instance, we have one of these new condominiums, dog daycares. And also it's important to say, when you talk about construction intensifications, it's not only about construction intensification, but also intensifications of the profits, because with the small units, we have a large amount of properties. And the condominiums begin to appear as a symbol of urban renewal. We are seeing many parts of the city, this renewal being conducted by the private ones. We don't have any substantial investment in public areas. By the contrary, we have this really change, and this also in a discourse that denied the privative character of the condominium. But when we're going deeper, it's a much more complex because they are very expensive, but also they could be more accessible because they are very small. We are talking about apartments of 20, even less than 20 square meters or even less. And what's interesting is that when we go in further to discuss this new product, we are seeing new forms of productions with an increased role of rent business. We see an increased articulations between developers and financial institutions. We see the developers became REITs, real estate investment funds, that is the name in Brazil. At the same time, we see real estate financial investments became developer. So it's a much more complex that we have to go deeper to understand what does it mean exactly. But what we see is this sophistications in the conceptions of the real estate as an investment. This is not new. Julio also mentioned in the case of Argentina, but it's emerged right now in a much more complex way, even as a financial investment and also in a concrete investment. In a concrete investment, as a small unit for small investors, but also we are seeing many cases where the entire building became a rent project. This is not new in Europe, but this is quite new here. And we are seeing the first, this emerged experience is spread very fast in the city of São Paulo. So this is this new questions that we try to develop in the further stage of our project. So my final considerations is just to reinforce this point, to understand rent structure as a continuous process, even though there are different dynamics in terms of form of productions, product, metropolitan reconfiguration, but we are seeing a continuous articulations with developer and increasing power of the financial institutions and also the power and of rent. And that the building appear as a form of rent extraction that is a bit new in Brazil. But this is we are just beginning to develop this discussion, and you are sure that we have to develop more these two ideas that I announced here as a preliminary conclusion. First is the idea of the emergence of new condominium forms as a central tool in the continuous improvement of accumulation and the real estate productions. And what's interesting is the strong convergence with public urban policy in some similarity what was discussed by the London case. And also we are seeing change in the forms of productions supported by strong articulation between developer and financial institutions, come up with the idea of the returns of the private rent sector or a kind of private landlordism. And what's very complicated when we discuss these questions is because even what we call about affordable housing that have some kind of subsidies that Juana mentioned can be sold as an investment. It is very complicated to analyze here in Brazil, but when we have this change of affordable house in the periphery, and now we have this affordable house in more central, not exactly central, but in the inside the city in São Paulo, we are seeing the diminution, the size of the unit, but also the capture of his social character to make this property working as an investment. So this is the question that I'd like to left here. And then is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bia. 20 minutes, perfect. So I would like to call all the speakers. It's a pity that Manuel Appert had to leave us because it's too late in France now. And so I'd like, first of all, thanks Manuel Alves and Christian Montes for inviting me. And also, César, do you want to be at the screen with us? Okay. So César is also with us now. We cannot see you. Okay. Well, yes. Hello, César. Nice to meet you.
Hello. Thank you for the invitation, but I was not prepared to be here with you, but it's a real pleasure aggregate this group. Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, thank you. So I was saying that I would like to thank Manuel Alves and Christian Montes for inviting me to comment this session that was really interesting. All the presentations were really great with new data about verticalization and real estate production in the different cities. So I have some comments, general comments, and then I have some specific questions to each of you. So I could see as a common issue here that we are trying to link forms of production of urban space and different urban morphologies or typology of buildings. So we here in the proposition of this symposium is try to find the connections between verticalization, high-rise buildings, and which agents, which actors, what kind of form of production is behind these real estate products. So another question in common that I think is that you pointed out the straight links between the origins of the real estate developers' activities and the production of high-rise building. Because this kind of typology of building, it requires, how can I say, technological capacity and also financial capacity, a high financial capacity of investment. And also this typology able to extract more value or to extract more urban rent. So this was really interesting that Julio presented this in the case of Santa Fe and also in the case of São Paulo, we can see. Another, and if we take the three cities that were presented here, London, São Paulo, and Santa Fe, we can see that there are common trends in São Paulo and Santa Fe as the new wave, the new boom is located in the central areas, this process of reconcentration. Can you hear me, Julio?
Now it's okay. Thanks.
It's okay?
Yeah.
So I can see that in São Paulo, in Santa Fe, there was this recent process of centralization of this verticalization process now in the last boom period, and also in terms of product, you can see as Bia presented these gated condominiums really near of the privatopia that Julio presented in the case of Santa Fe. This new kind of condominium that how can I say, that offers, besides housing, offices, also public spaces, leisure, and all facilities together. And another, in the case of London, is more the process of suburbanization in the last wave of verticalization, the special projects in the suburbs. So maybe there is also, the question is, maybe we can find some trends in the cities, the global south, and other trends in the cities of the considered so-called global north. In this case, for me, there was this difference related to the location of these verticalization projects in this new wave. I'm referring to the last phase that you presented. And I could see more similarities between São Paulo and Santa Fe, even with the big difference between the how can I say, the type of city, São Paulo and Santa Fe, but I could see these similarities. And I think another question in common here is the relationship between verticalization and financialization, as Huana pointed out as the main question of their presentation. So I'd like, considering these general comments, I would like to ask you precisely what's the link for you between financialization and verticalization. For instance, in the beginning of the so-called financialization of housing, it was at stake the secondary mortgage market for this. Or then when we call the urban financialization, also is uh, um, the how can I say, the diffusion or the arrival of financial investors as owners of these buildings and also as shareholders of these companies, these developers, for instance. So I'd like that if you could precisely say for you what's these links. I think Juana finished her presentation asking, saying that there is a new stage for financialization of housing in São Paulo. So I'd like if you can comment a little bit more about this finding. So this would be my general question for you here, for you 3 or 4. Then for Julio, I have one doubt specific, and also because Bia wrote here in the chat, could you explain us the fideicomiso? If it's more related to the property, to the ownership, or to the financing investment, or this is as we call here, fundo de investimento imobiliário, or the rates in the United States. But I think there are some specificities in the case of fideicomiso, and this word in Spanish for me, it was always a big doubt. So if you could explain, for us here, the Brazilian people, is really interesting to know more about. If it's really like our we call fundo de investimento imobiliário. So this is a specific question. And then for one, I think Bia, after she answered a little bit my question, but if when you made that incredible charts relating verticalization and years and type of housing, I was wondering if this new verticalization in central area that you identified as affordable housing, what's the public target? After Bia, she said that it's not really the subsidized housing because we are after the Minha Casa Minha Vida period. So could you explain a little bit more this new stage, this process of verticalization in central area that you identified? And for Bia, I think in this new stage, after the crisis in 2014 and this crisis that's until today, you named other large developers. I'd like if you can explain who are they, these other large developers. They are the old large developers, local developers. They are new ones. So I'd like more. And not just a provocation, what's the difference for you between a concrete investment and a financial investment? So these are my questions. I don't know if you have questions for each other. I think we can share. If we don't have any question in the chat of YouTube, I think it's the opportunity of, if you have another question to put for between you, it's open. Okay, we have more 20 minutes.
I have one question to Juana and César. I thought really interesting the graphic we use to show the standards and doing this connection. Maybe very interesting to see this movement. My question is,
Hello, hi everyone.
are you listening? Are you listening?
Hello, yes, I'm listening now.
So,
okay.
But
Bia,
Could I repeat?
you
Could I repeat the question?
yeah,
Okay. So I'm just saying that I thought very interesting the way you present this graphic schemes when we put the periods and the tendency of verticalizations. My doubt is how they represent the space. They are I mean, because when we consider the city of São Paulo itself is a unity that is quite different from the border of the metropolis, but itself is really heterogeneous itself. And how this scheme bring this for this representation, or no, but it's important to pass this whole idea. It's more a technical issue, but I think it's really interesting. And I think we have a lot of questions and things in common. It will be very interesting in further opportunities to discuss it even more.
Okay. So I know that I made huge questions, and we have few time here. So if you can be, you know, only try to resume, try to. Well, it's not. You don't need to answer my question about financialization. Only pointing some tips for us. But Julio, I think we can follow the order of presentation. So Julio, Huana, and César, and Bia. All right?
okay.
Very brief, because it is difficult for me to explain the difference between condominio and fideicomiso. I begin with condominio. In a condominio, there is a group of people which are each of them investors, and they share the responsibilities in order to fulfill an object, which is a new building. This new building, all of us share the obligation, share the responsibility of the construction of a new building. And if there is any trouble, my personal funds, my patrimony, is part of my background in the operation. So I have to put my personal patrimony as a background of the condominium. In the fideicomiso, which is relatively new as a legal figure, we give money to a third person, to some other people. And that people have the responsibility of the use of our money. But if business goes bad, is not profitable, I do not have to use my personal money as a background of the operation. So there is a separation between the money I give the fideicomiso agent and my own patrimony. So the risk is different, because in the case of the condominium, each one of the condominiants has personal responsibilities. In the fideicomiso, I don't have personal responsibility. The responsibility is of the manager of the fideicomiso. That's the difference. And this is very successful operation. In both cases, the idea is to get a more flexible instrument for the financialization of the construction. And the fideicomiso is in our law since 1994. And it was, in the last 20 years, is more useful here. So we do not have any more condominiums. We have fideicomisos now. And the fideicomiso may be for this building or for something else. No, it's not clear which is the object of the fideicomiso.
Okay, thank you.
You have the same figure, I think. You have something similar, or no? Yes.
Yes, yes. For us, it's like we have it's really it's our fundo de investimento imobiliário. It's the legal figure that is really related to fideicomiso, and this was here in Brazil was from the 90s also that was created, and now we are using this legal instrument more after the 2000s, from 2000 and on, that we started to use more, like you, yeah, like in your case. Okay, thank you. Huana?
Hello. I was trying to find the map we have done, but I didn't find. César, I think I sent you in our email with the operations, but well, so I will respond the question of Lucia about what's the public of this affordable housing identified in this recent period. We identified a reduction, as Beatriz said. We identified a reduction in this apartment. So what we are calling as affordable housing, and we have to problematize this concept because we are using the institutional concept. It's not our choice. We are using the institutional concept done by the FGTS Conselho, which called this as popular housing, and the real estate developers who calls these apartments as economic apartments, with the vice president of economic apart, it's related with subsidized housing. So we used this concept of affordable housing as the literature who use this concept to talk about subsidized housing. Then we have to question in the context of the research that this affordable housing constructed for this new moment of the real estate might be a studio of 25 square meters for a couple and or one person. Yes, but they are being subsidized. They are being they were considered as Minha Casa Minha Vida. The other question of Beatriz question was about the localization and what kind where in the capital. Yeah, I was trying to find. So we have these cases like studios in more central areas like Barra Funda. We have also a part that's in the periphery of the city, but we have also in in the more critical moment, the price of the land was reduced, and for example, MRV bought a land with 10 or 50% of reduction, they said. And it's a big project in the old model of affordable housing, Minha Casa Minha Vida affordable housing. So there is a variation in this kind of product named. It's in fact there is some typology, some projects that are being named by this name of popular housing or economic housing.
I don't know if César.
Yeah, so thank you. I talked a little bit about your question, Lucia, about financialization and relationship between finance and things like that. So when I was looking for the maps, but I think it's better. Well, I think it's better. Yeah, I'm afraid that I have these maps with me now, so I will answer the question from Lucia about financialization. So Lucia, I think that in our work we deal with hypotheses constructed considering a kind of triangle between finance, public fund, and ground rent. So ground rent is related to location, and because that's the importance of the process of centralization of development and public funds, it's related to the way to use resources from social programs like Minha Casa Minha Vida. So, a hypothesis considered that I know very strong way to capture the financialization process is based on in the position of some developers in the capital markets. So if we consider listed developers, listed companies, we have to we can observe that this group of companies improved the conditions of loan in the range, in subsidized range in the last years. So it's a kind of complement of the answer that Juana's the idea about Juana's was talking about before. So in this case, we can observe that the participation of this kind of company in developments, in more centralized developments, is a way to capture. A kind of a surplus social value in this double way, using the location as a way to capture via ground rent, this surplus social value, and also using the social programs as a way to promote market in a specific range of price of the units. In this way, we can observe that this kind of this group of companies are investing in all of this have a very specific typology that is represented here for the verticalization, the high-rise buildings, because verticalization in fact, we read verticalization as a way to capture and reproduce ground rents in a way that we can construct ground, additional grounds in vertical verticalization can reproduce the ground so in another way is to consider that simultaneously virtualization could be considered a way to reduce the presence of the land costs at the final price of the unit. So in this double way, the location can contribute to improve the gains, the profit of this group of enterprises. And when the enterprises adjust the price of their unities, they can absorb the benefits from the social programs or housing programs like Minha Casa Minha Vida. So that's the general hypothesis that gives the sense, the more general sense of our work. And I believe that because that this idea is absolutely related. It's a way, in fact, to understand this process of centralization in a way, in a very close way. Related to the financialization process. So thank you, and sorry for this complex explanation. The idea is much more simple like that, but thank you.
No, thank you. Yes, I understood your answer, and I think I agree with you in this new wave of a kind of financialization. So, Bia, please, could you answer?
Thank you, Lucia, for all your questions. Regarding the comments about Global South, North, I think it's a bit more complicated to say that São Paulo is more connected with Santa Fe and not with London because of this idea of suburbanization and centralization in terms of space. Because I think this strategy of changing space and a bit of what César trying put for us right now, it's always a strategy of improve accumulations. But what's interesting to compare is also the other part of the finance tools, the model of consumptions of the houses. It seems for me that right now, this new stage of São Paulo, we are becoming more closer, but this is a very simplified affirmation, more closest with the countries in the north. What are you saying about that? Because our previous model, it's really based on a kind of, with a lot of red senses, of democratization of the property. So we have this massive production, and now it seems that production will be more and more concentrated, because now we are seeing this very difficult frontier between what's this for social purpose or not. And even we are seeing for the first time the launchings of investment funds target to housing. It's a kind of novelty for us, and it's not a novelty in for the North discussion. But what's interesting for me, it was necessary, this first stage of sprawling, of suburbanization, to create this new level of price, both in the periphery, so we could explore in more density, in more high prices in the center of the metropolis. But all of this, and César and Huana must be discussed, that also is related with our plano diretor, I don't know, master plan, that we have since 2014. So we have this coincidence. And in this case, I think there are lots of also proximities in the case of Santa Fe, but also in the case of London, that this is also, I like the idea that Manuel presented, this dependence. The public sector are become dependent of real estate development. When we are seen here strongly, and all these developers come back to São Paulo also because the municipality offer high levels of density with no price, with no charge. So also the municipality use some strategies to off them to come back. But when they come back, they don't put the same project. They don't. They put the differentiation. They differentiated the strategies. So it's really interesting. To why I'm saying is that we have to discuss the both states with a lot of connections, and also see the states as a new level. But I will really have to develop more this idea. You have two other questions. What I mean about other large developers. This is no, okay. Regarding these questions about other larger developers, this is defined in our research. I don't have time, because in this research, we choose the 25 bigger developers of the city, and 13 of them are publicly traded companies, and the other no. But it's interesting because in many interviews, what they call about the other companies, that they are companies that are prepared to offer IPOs. They are companies that are very interesting to invest on them because they could trace the investment inside these companies. So it seems that this company doesn't suffer as the big ones suffer in the crisis. So during this period, 2015, 16, the big companies suffer a lot. So they occupy space. Now we are trying to develop more what's happening in 17 and 18. But it's companies like Vitacom, lots of the companies that create new models, but it's really connected with financial institution and financial instruments. And what I mean about the concrete and financial investment, it's we really could discuss and precise even more, but it's this idea, and maybe it's important to clarify that I choose the kind of condominium that I think that's in this period is the dominant one, is the one that is bringing the most sophisticated scheme of accumulation, and maybe the one that brings extraordinary profits. There are another tendencies, of course, but what I mentioned about concrete and investment is this idea that they are being producing as a financial investment. So they generate a kind of title, financial title, as a quota of this investment trust. But at the same time, they are selling as a very interesting investment itself. Like buy the apartment is a very interesting investment, because also I didn't mention that there is a lot of new schemes of and this is important what César said. They say rent ground and rent because we have to make this difference in English. They bring lots of sophistications in terms of long stay rent schemes, Airbnb platforms. So they aggregate also a lot of technology to intensify the rent extraction. So they sell for as an investment or as a concrete are very interesting. I think I answer all the questions. I just want to mention that all this discussion that I presented is also a result of the many research of the students that are discussing along this year about this access, about this product. So there are many of them, Isabella, Livia, Bia, Mateus, Natalia. I don't have time to talk all of them, but it's interesting because it's a kind of collective discussion that I bring today. Yes, I think I asked. Yeah, I think I did it. Thank you, Lucia.
Thank you, all of you. I think Manuel Alves wants to join us. And I'd like to thank you again. It was really nice to be here with you today. And I think we have a lot of issues to share. And then, well, we keep in touch. Manuel, thank you.
No, I thank you, guys. I don't know, is it possible, for instance, Professor Christian Montes, if he can be on the screen? I don't know if he can or not. I don't know if there is a limit of 6 people. But anyway, I want to thank you all, guys, for this incredible panel. You know, I would love to keep on here talking, for instance, discussing with Julio if there is any difference between the concepts of high-rising, verticalization, and verticality, for instance, in this private utopia that we are developing, as well as, I mean, I think that what we see in São Paulo, many of this panel is very representative of one of the goals that we have had with the symposium. I mean, it's just to bring light to different approaches and to identify some convergences that may happen, because one of the premises of the project is that independently of the city, there would be some similarities in the production of high rises, you know, due to other reasons, not only to the verticality. And then that's why it was so wonderful. And I was saying, I mentioned Julio, but I mean, also for me, São Paulo is a question, because although we have a reduction of the square area of the apartments, we also have a significant alteration of the typology. And these smaller apartments that are, most of them that are being built and commercialized in the central area or areas of centrality, as Juana pointed out, are not necessarily independently of the institutional concept, cannot be qualified as affordable housing or popular housing, because the selling price of the square meter is another story. So we still have smaller apartments, but the selling price very high. Well, anyway, just and I hope we will have the opportunity to some moment in the future to keep on with this conversation and keep on debating about the findings of each one of us in our researches. And for that, and for your availability of being here with us, and for Lucia to cooperate and being such a wonderful moderator, in my name and name of Christian Montes and all the others in the research project, I just want to thank you guys. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.